Welcome back to Flagstone Trail.
It's great to be back.
Diving into Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power is always,
A little daunting.
yeah, it can be a little intense but fascinating too.
Oh, for sure.
Today we're tackling Law 2, never put too much trust in friends, learn how to use enemies.
That's a mouthful.
It is. I have to admit, when I first read that one, I was like, whoa.
Right. Sounds a little ruthless, doesn't it?
It does, but I think, as we dig in, we'll see that maybe it's not as cutthroat as it sounds at first glance.
I think you're right. It's important to remember Green's looking at power dynamics through a historical lens. Not saying we should all become like Machiavelli.
Right, exactly. So where do we even begin with this one?
Well, Green kicks things off with a pretty dramatic story from 9th century Byzantium.
Ooh, Byzantium.
Yeah. It involves Emperor Michael III and his close friend Basilius. Now, Michael came to the throne very young.
Okay.
Very inexperienced.
So he needed help.
Needed guidance, right. So he leaned heavily on Basilius. This guy was originally just a stable groom. Yeah, just a stable groom. Michael elevated him to a position of immense power.
I mean, I guess when you're the emperor, you can do that. But trusting someone with no political experience in such a high-stakes role
It's recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. Michael, he just showered Basilius with gifts, education. He even married him to his own mistress.
Oh, wow. So he's really tying their lives together.
He thought these acts of generosity would guarantee, this unwavering loyalty.
I see. So he's thinking with his heart, not his head.
Exactly. But as Basilius's influence grew, so did his ambition.
Of course.
He started manipulating Michael. Even convinced him that his own uncle was a threat.
Oh, so he's turning him against his own family.
I'm glad.
Wow. So even though Michael thought these favors were strengthening their bond, he was actually feeding this ambition in Basilius.
He was fueling the desire for more.
And Michael, he didn't see any of this coming.
He was blinded by his focus on personal feelings. He really failed to see that by elevating Basilius, he was creating a rival.
That's a tough lesson.
Nah.
Did Michael ever realize what was happening?
He did, but tragically too late.
Oh, no.
By the time he recognized Basilius's true intentions, Basilius had already consolidated enough power
To take over.
to orchestrate Michael's assassination and seize the throne.
That's brutal. What a stark example of how misplaced trust can backfire, especially when power is involved.
There's a lot at stake.
So how does this idea of using enemies come into play? How do we go from that story to using enemies?
Well, Green contrasts Michael's downfall with the strategic brilliance of another ruler, Emperor Sung of China.
Okay, bring on the emperor.
So unlike Michael, Sung recognized the inherent danger in surrounding himself with ambitious allies.
Right. They might try to take over.
They might get tempted to usurp his power.
So instead of relying on, potentially fickle friendships, he took a different route.
He did. He understood that fear and ambition, these were powerful motivators. Okay.
So he comes up with this plan to neutralize these threats from his top generals.
How did he do that?
Invites them to a lavish feast.
Well, a feast. I like where this is going.
Plenty of food, wine,
Get them nice and comfortable.
Exactly. And then when they're at their most vulnerable, he hits them with this proposition.
What's the deal?
He basically tells them, look, I know you all want my throne. Instead of risking your lives and the stability of the empire in a power struggle, I'm offering you a life of luxury. Retire to your estates, enjoy your riches, and leave the burden of ruling to me. That's incredible. He turned his potential enemies into contented retirees. All at once.
He understood that removing the temptation was a lot more effective than relying on shaky loyalty. And he applied the same kind of strategy when dealing with conquered enemies.
Oh, interesting. Like how so?
Well, when he captured King Lu, instead of punishing him, Sung showed unexpected generosity. He even shared a cup of wine with him to demonstrate his trust.
I bet King Lu was a little nervous about that wine.
He was terrified, thought it was poisoned. But that fear and Sung's willingness to seemingly risk his own life, it was all calculated.
A power move.
It was a powerful display of trust, but also a calculated move to disarm a potential enemy.
So King Lu sees this act of what looks like good faith, and he's basically disarmed.
He becomes a loyal follower.
Wow. So Sung understood that sometimes showing vulnerability, or at least the appearance of it, can actually be a strength.
It's about manipulating perceptions, building trust.
Fascinating.
And these examples, they really illustrate Green's point. It's not about being heartless or malicious.
It's about being smart.
It's about understanding the forces at play in any relationship, forces that we don't always see.
This is making me think about all the times I've just assumed someone had my back. Especially in situations where there's like a power dynamic.
It's easy to get blinded by our own assumptions about friendship and loyalty.
It really is. And I guess that's what Law 2 is really pushing us to examine, right? To get a clearer perspective.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even the closest relationships, they can be influenced by things that we might not even be consciously aware of. So we've been talking about powerful figures using generosity, showing trust to kind of neutralize those threats.
Right. Get them on their side.
But what about actually using your former enemies to your advantage?
That's where I get a little lost. I mean, isn't the whole point of an enemy that you're against them? How do they become an asset?
Well, think about someone who was on the other side, and then they switch sides. They've got a lot to prove, right?
Yeah, they want to show you they're loyal now.
They're motivated to show their loyalty, show how competent they are, even more so than someone who's always been in your inner circle.
Because they have something to prove. They were underestimated before.
Exactly. Green uses the example of Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, honest Abe.
Now, we usually think of Lincoln as this figure of unity and reconciliation.
Right, especially with the Civil War.
Bringing everyone together. That doesn't sound very use your enemies, does it?
Not really.
But here's the nuance. Lincoln understood that real power, lasting power, it comes from turning enemies into allies.
I see.
There's this great story where this elderly woman, she criticizes Lincoln for not being harsh enough on the South after the war.
Really?
She thought he should treat them as irreconcilable enemies instead of fellow human beings in error.
Wow, so she wanted him to punish them more.
Yeah.
What did Lincoln say to that?
His reply is amazing. He just asks, why, madam, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?
Wow.
He gets it. Real peace, national unity. It doesn't come from punishment and resentment. It's about bridging the divide.
Yeah, bringing people together.
Finding that common ground, turning those former enemies into partners to rebuild.
So he wasn't being naive. He was playing the long game.
He knew that turning enemies into allies, that was the most powerful move.
I love that.
And Green gives another example that might surprise you.
Oh, whoa.
Henry Kissinger.
Kissinger, Mr. Realpolitik himself.
Yeah, even Kissinger saw the value in engaging with opponents. During the Vietnam War, he secretly met with people who were allegedly involved in a plot to kidnap him.
Wait, are you serious? He met with people who wanted to kidnap him.
And he did. And instead of confronting them, with accusations, he chose dialogue.
That's a bold move.
He explained his strategic thinking, tried to help them understand, maybe even find some common ground.
I guess even in that situation, he saw the value in understanding his adversaries. Maybe tune them into, well, maybe not friends, but at least less hostile. Right.
Exactly. It highlights another part of law, too. Knowledge is power. The more you know about your opponent, what drives them, what they fear, what they want, the better you can anticipate their moves, maybe even influence them.
Like keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But not in a creepy way.
Not at all.
It's more about if you really get someone, even if you don't agree with them, you can handle those relationships better.
That's a great point. It's about recognizing that even people we see as enemies, they can give us valuable information, insights.
So we've talked about neutralizing threats, turning enemies into allies. Is there another way this using enemies thing plays out?
There is. Green talks about using enemies to define your own cause.
What do you mean?
To give your movement, your goals, a sense of purpose, a sense of urgency.
Okay, how does that work?
He uses Mao Zedong. He led the Communist Revolution in China. Mao believed that having a clear enemy was key to uniting his followers, solidifying his power.
So it's that us versus them idea, like having a common enemy makes people band together.
Exactly. And it's a tactic that's been used forever, from ancient empires to political campaigns today. Framing things as a fight against a common foe, leaders can rally people, justify their actions, really solidify their base.
That makes sense. But it also seems like it could be used for like propaganda and stuff.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Oh.
That's why it's important to be aware of these tactics. Green's not saying we should just use them blindly. He wants us to recognize them. The more we understand how power works, the less we can be manipulated by it.
So it's like once you see the strings, you can't be a puppet anymore.
Exactly. Awareness is the key to taking control. And remember, power is always changing. Alliances shift. Enemies pop up. The whole landscape changes.
So we had to be ready to adapt.
Stay adaptable. Observe. Analyze. Adjust your strategies.
This is all fascinating stuff, but it's a lot to take in, you know? It's like emperors and presidents, these big power players.
Revolutions, wars.
Yeah, but how does this beware of friends, use enemies idea, how does that actually play out in our everyday lives?
It seems a bit much for dealing with a coworker you don't get along with.
You're right. It's not about being like some Machiavellian schemer, you know?
Right.
But those ideas, those principles, they can be relevant in our own lives. Think about it. Have we all experienced betrayal from someone we thought was close? Or maybe unexpected support from someone we didn't think much of?
Yeah, I've definitely been there. There's this one time I got passed over for a promotion, and it turned out a colleague I thought was a friend was actually undermining me the whole time.
Oh, that's a classic example. Yeah, it was rough.
It shows how personal feelings, hidden agendas, they can really come into play, even at work.
Yeah, I thought we were on the same team, you know?
And Green's saying we need to be more strategic, more observant in all our relationships.
Okay.
Because even our friends can have different goals or motivations that we don't see.
So, pay attention to what people do, not just what they say.
Exactly. It's not about being paranoid. It's about really seeing what's going on, who actually comes through, who's always trying to take credit. Those little things tell you a lot about a person.
It's like everyone's playing their own game, even if they don't mean to be sneaky about it.
Right. And sometimes the people we see as enemies, they can actually help us grow.
Really?
They challenge us, they push us to be better, and they might see things that we miss.
Okay, I can see that. But how do we use these enemies without being manipulative?
It's not about exploiting anyone. It's about working together, even with people we don't naturally click with. Some of the best work comes from those unexpected partnerships.
Yeah, people with different skills can balance each other out, I guess.
Exactly. Think about that coworker who always plays devil's advocate. Maybe they're not just being difficult. Maybe they're making you think harder, make your ideas better.
Oh, that's a good point.
Or that competitor you used to go up against, now they work somewhere else. Maybe they have insights about the industry, or you could even work on something together.
So it's about seeing enemies differently.
Mm-hmm.
Not as obstacles, but as potential allies.
Yeah.
People you can learn from or find common ground with.
That's a great way to put it. And don't forget, one of the best ways to use an enemy is to learn from them.
Steal their secrets.
Not steal, but watch their tactics.
Right. See how they do things.
Study their strengths and weaknesses. That knowledge can help you predict what they'll do, and it can help you navigate those relationships.
That's a chess game.
It is like a chess game.
Right.
Sometimes the best way to beat an enemy is to just outsmart them. Not by being aggressive, but by really understanding how the game works.
This has been really eye-opening. I feel like I'm seeing the world in a whole new way.
It's a little scary, right?
Yeah, but also kind of exciting.
That's the power of Green's work. It makes us question things and become more strategic in our lives. And it's not about being manipulative. It's about understanding power so we can use it well.
And maybe even turn some of those enemies into friends or allies.
Right. So as we wrap up Law 2, I'll leave you with one last thought. Green says power is always changing. Even the closest friendships can fall apart. So what does that mean for what we want to achieve? Can we really be successful without losing the connections that matter to us? It's something to think about.
That's a great question to leave us with. And that's it for today's Flagstone Trail discussion. We appreciate your listenership.